From a young age, Emma could feel that something was different about her family. In other homes, children were hugged, asked questions, and listened to when they cried. But in Emma's house, silence was the norm. Affection was a rare commodity reserved for holidays, rituals everyone performed, but no one truly believed in. Her parents were always busy. Her mother worked as a clerk at a government office, and her father was an electrical engineer who often traveled for work. Though Emma didn't lack material things, she grew up with the feeling that something was missing, something she couldn't quite name. At dinner, when the family did manage to sit together, the conversations were limited to school grades, rules, and have you done your homework? Never. How are you feeling today? Emma was the middle child, a position often forgotten. Her older sister was the academic star, while her younger brother was the adorable baby. Emma sat in between, neither brilliant enough to be praised, nor young enough to be doted on. She gradually learned to not be a bother, to keep her stories to herself, to expect nothing. She did her homework alone, cooked her meals, took care of herself from the age of 10. Every time she looked up hoping for a warm glance, she was met with mechanical nods, or worse, passive indifference. Once Emma received a poor grade in math. She was terrified not of the grade itself, but of the reaction it would provoke. Still, she gathered her courage to tell her mother, hoping for a hug or even a word of comfort. Her mother glanced at the paper and said coldly, "Then study harder. Don't disappoint me again." That night, Emma lay in bed, tears streaming down, not from sadness, but from the aching loneliness of having no one to be sad with. By the time she entered middle school, Emma began noticing the gap between her and her classmates. At school, her peers chatted excitedly about family outings, warm birthday wishes, and homemade cakes. Emma had never had a birthday cake. Her parents often forgot her birthday unless her grandmother reminded them. When someone asked, "Are you having a party tonight?" Emma simply smiled and replied, "No, we don't really do that at my house." Gradually, Emma became a quiet, withdrawn student. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she didn't know what to share when no one had ever truly listened. She feared that speaking up would lead to mockery, pity, or worse, indifference. She watched classmates being picked up after school while she walked home alone, unlocked the door by herself, made instant noodles, and did her homework in the kitchen with only the sound of the TV echoing from the living room. Her parents weren't cruel. They didn't beat her or shout. But the persistent passive neglect year after year left a silent fracture inside her. She wasn't angry at them, but she felt like a stranger in her own home. When she had headaches or felt exhausted, she didn't call for her mother. When she stumbled or was misunderstood by friends, she shared it with no one. Emma learned to endure as though it was a default setting encoded into her being. As she grew older, Emma appeared independent to the outside world. But she knew deep down it wasn't independence, it was abandonment. People praised her for being well-behaved, calm, and mature, but no one asked whether that calmness was really just a shell hiding years of unspoken loneliness. Emma entered puberty without a single conversation from her mother. No one explained the changes in her body, the whirlwind of emotions, or how to care for herself with kindness. Everything she learned came from books, the internet, or whispered chats with classmates. Lessons that should have been wrapped in love arrived instead, through quiet, solitary searching. When Emma got her first period, she panicked. Not because of the blood, but because she didn't know who to call. She waited until her parents were asleep, rummaged through the bathroom drawers, found an old pack of sanitary pads, probably left over from her older sister, and figured it out herself. The next morning, she went to school as if nothing had happened. No one knew she had just crossed one of life's most significant milestones alone. It didn't just happen once. When bullied by classmates, Emma didn't cry. She came home, played loud music, and wrote in her journal. When she scored high marks, she kept it to herself. She had learned that there was no one to share joy or sadness with, so it was better to hold it in. Over time, she built a shell not to hide weakness, but to protect a delicate heart that had never been properly cared for. Eventually, Emma stopped hoping. She no longer expected her parents to remember her birthday. She didn't expect to be asked how she was when she felt unwell. She didn't expect anyone to call her into the living room and say, "Are you okay?" She learned to survive like a tree growing in the shade, no sunlight but still stretching upward. A child raised not through love, but through learning how to live without it. Emma entered adulthood as if emerging from a long, blurry dream. She went to college, got her first job, started paying rent, and treated herself to the first decent meals of her life without needing anyone's permission. Each milestone came in silence, no congratulations, no words of encouragement. But this time, Emma didn't expect them. Though calm on the outside, inside, Emma were still spaces that hadn't been filled. She once loved a kind man but didn't know how to open up. She had genuine friends but often still felt like she didn't belong. And on some nights, even as a successful, independent, free woman, she would sit alone in her small apartment, tears falling, without knowing why. Not because she was in pain, but because she had never learned how to be comforted. Instead of resentment, Emma chose healing. She went to therapy, read books, and practiced morning journaling. She didn't try to blame her parents. She understood they too were likely products of a generation raised with too little affection. But she made a decision she would be different. She refused to repeat the cycle. She learned to say no to toxic relationships, to say, "I need help," without shame, and to hold herself close when the world turned cold. Now, when she looks back, Emma doesn't call her childhood a tragedy. She calls it a foundation that taught her the value of care. Because she once lacked it, she knew how to cherish being listened to. Because she was once ignored, she became someone who truly hears others. And because she once felt so alone, she became someone kind, not because she had to, but because she never wanted anyone else to grow up the way she did. Emma arrived at university with 2 worn-out suitcases, a full scholarship, and a heart full of quiet resolve. No one from her family came with her on move-in day. Her parents sent a single message: "Study well." No goodbyes, no advice, no hugs. Emma was used to that, but deep down she still wished someone had been there just to feel less alone. For many, college is a vibrant chapter of youth. For Emma, it was a relentless stretch of studying, working, and surviving isolation. She waited tables at night, worked as a teaching assistant on weekends, and occasionally translated documents to make ends meet. No one forced her. She chose this path because Emma knew if she didn't lift herself up, no one else would. No one from her family called to ask how her classes were going or if she was eating properly. Once she had a high fever for 3 days and still went to work afraid to lose the income. She lay curled up in her dorm room with a wet cloth on her forehead, completely alone. But instead of feeling sorry for herself, Emma whispered, "I'm doing this for me." Every step forward is a step out of the dark, and it was. Despite exhaustion, Emma consistently ranked among the top of her class. Professors trusted her with responsibilities, but what she valued most wasn't the grades. It was the sense that with every challenge she overcame, she loosened the grip of abandonment on her heart. Graduation day came sooner than Emma expected. She received the official confirmation email from the university, complete with seating charts and the section designated for family members. While her classmates excitedly called their parents, picked out flowers, planned celebration dinners, and arranged outfits, Emma quietly filed the email into a folder labeled "Not for Anyone." She still registered to attend the ceremony because this moment mattered. But when asked to list how many guests she'd be bringing, she typed in, one not for her parents, but for her roommate of 3 years, the girl who brought her medicine-cooked porridge when she was sick and sat by her when the silence felt too heavy. To Emma, that was real family. That day, the campus bloomed with flowers, balloons, and laughter. Emma wore her gown and cap and felt a strange sense of calm settle inside her. No one shouted her name from the stands. No bouquet labeled from mom and dad. But as she held the diploma in her hand and looked out at the sea of celebrating families, she thought, I did this, and I did it on my own. Classmates posed for family pictures. Some invited Emma to join so it wouldn't look so empty, but she politely declined. Not out of sadness, but because Emma knew this emptiness couldn't be filled with snapshots. It was a space she had long since learned to coexist with. Then when her roommate hugged her tightly, tears glimmering in her eyes, and whispered congratulations, Emma smiled for the first time that day. Not to mask anything, but to acknowledge. Even if no one else sees it, this is a real victory. That evening after the graduation ceremony, Emma returned to her dorm. Her friends went off to dinners with their families, while she and her roommate ordered takeout and sat on the floor to eat. As laughter and music echoed through the hallway from celebration parties, Emma remained composed, but something inside her quietly began to fracture. She picked up her phone and glanced at her call log. No missed calls from her parents. No congratulatory text. Not even a question about how the day had gone. She held the phone for a long time, then set it down without sending anything. And in that moment, Emma didn't feel angry, she felt stunned. A truth had settled her achievement meant nothing to her family. She hadn't expected a party, but at least a message, a simple, well done, some recognition that the last 4 years of effort hadn't been invisible. But there was nothing. And the pain didn't come from what was missing. It came from the feeling of being unseen, as though her effort was either expected or simply unworthy of notice. That shock hit harder than any sleepless exam night or exhausting work shift. It made her wonder, if I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone at home even notice? A question not born from a desire for pity, but the quiet plea of a daughter who once wished to be seen but never was. And in that space, Emma realized sometimes what people need isn't unconditional love. It's a simple nod, a quiet acknowledgement. You did well. Without it, even the brightest victories feel incomplete, haunting in their solitude. After graduation, Emma spent a few quiet days packing up her dorm, preparing for her first full-time job. A small environmental company had offered her a position after her internship, a place where for the first time her hard work was met with praise, with trust, and with the feeling of truly being deserving. While clearing off her old bookshelf stacked with textbooks, notes, and memories of sleepless nights, Emma paused. She ran her fingers over a notebook cover where years ago she had written in red pen, "Succeed not to prove anything to anyone, but so I don't need anyone." But now that sentence didn't quite fit anymore. She realized growing up isn't about denying your need to be loved, it's about accepting that not everyone knows how to give it. And so you learn to offer it to yourself first. On her first morning of work, Emma wore a crisp white shirt, tied her hair neatly, and looked into the mirror. No more searching eyes looking for recognition. No more silent questions like, will they see me now? She simply whispered, I see me. And I'm proud. From that moment, Emma continued her story, not running from abandonment, but moving toward a version of herself who loved enough to stop needing others to fill the void. Every success she earned, every smile, every time she stood back up after falling, became proof that sometimes the last person left to validate you is you. After graduation, Emma no longer expected anything from her family. She didn't reach out, didn't send photos of her diploma, didn't ask if anyone wanted to meet. She felt as if she had closed a door not out of resentment, but exhaustion. In the early days of her new job, Emma found small joys, kind coworkers, a supportive office environment, and the smallest recognition warmed her more than she expected. No one at work knew she was the forgotten daughter, no one asked about her family, and Emma didn't bring it up. To her, it felt like starting over a life unchained from the past. But the silence didn't last. One Sunday night, as Emma sat reading in her rented room, her phone buzzed. It was her mother. The first message in over 3 months since graduation. Just a short text. "Where do you work now? When will you send money home to help with household expenses?" Emma stared at the screen stunned. No congratulations, no how are you, no hint of apology. Just a demand. Shock crept through her not because of what was said, but because it was exactly what she had always known. This family didn't need Emma as a daughter. They needed her as a provider, a conditional presence, love exchanged for labor. Emma didn't reply right away. She needed time to process, to understand what exactly she was feeling. In the end, she didn't feel sad and she wasn't bitter. The only thought that remained was, to them, have I ever been a person or just a tool? She thought back to all the years she worked hard in school, took side jobs, saved every penny not for praise, but to avoid criticism. She had done all the right things, yet never once heard, "I'm proud of you" or "Are you doing okay?" And now, having graduated, working and supporting herself, they didn't ask if she was tired, if she was okay, if she was happy. They only asked when she would send money. Emma chose to respond, "I just started work less than 2 months ago. I'm on probation and the pay isn't enough to support others. When I'm more stable, I'll consider it." A polite, short message. No anger, no bitterness. Just her way of setting a boundary for the first time. Her mother's reply came quickly and predictably. "You kids get educated and forget your parents. We worked hard to raise you and now you turn your back on us." No empathy, no understanding, just blame, as if Emma choosing to live her own life was a betrayal. And in that moment, more clearly than ever, Emma realized in her family there was no space for remorse, only expectations. After the accusatory message, Emma stayed silent. She didn't want to argue further, but a few days later her phone rang again. This time it was her father. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. His voice was flat calm, but cold. "You're grown now, you should start taking responsibility. We're planning to renovate the living room. Your mother says you should contribute something. Doesn't have to be much, but it needs to be something. Not, 'How are you?' Not, 'How's work going?' No real interest, no genuine concern, just a fixed financial expectation framed as obligation." Emma listened, letting him finish. Then she responded clearly. "I don't agree with how you and Mom treat me. I'm not a wallet. I'm a person and I deserve to be treated as one." There was a pause on the other end before her father replied, his tone slightly lower. "The more you study, the more distant you sound. Family is about helping each other, not keeping score." Emma didn't argue. She calmly replied, "I've helped a lot, but have you ever asked if I needed help?" It was the first time Emma asked the question in return, and she knew it wouldn't be answered, because in their eyes she existed to give, and her needs, they were never seen as something worth noticing. In the weeks that followed, Emma made no effort to reach out, and as she predicted, her family didn't follow up either. No messages, no check-ins, no acknowledgement of what had been said. Everything slipped back into silence as if nothing had ever happened. But strangely enough this time, Emma didn't feel sad. The pain had always been there. But after that final reaction, she understood something deeper. It wasn't just that she hadn't been loved properly. Maybe her parents had never learned how to love properly at all. She began to view her family with clearer eyes, not to forgive, but to understand. They didn't feel remorse because they didn't believe they had done anything wrong. All they saw was that she had changed, that she had become distant, that she was ungrateful for no longer doing what they expected. They didn't see the journey of a child growing up in silence, healing on her own, and finally choosing to keep herself whole. Emma no longer needed their apologies. She only needed permission to stop carrying the consequences of their emotional limitations. From then on, she felt lighter. She didn't cut ties, but she also didn't try to mend what couldn't be fixed. She still sent polite messages on holidays, still remembered her mother's birthday, not because they needed it, but because she wanted to honor her role in a way that felt safe and self-defined. And most importantly, Emma no longer waited for anything from them. Not recognition, not gratitude, not late-bloomed affection. Because sometimes growing up means learning that not everyone is capable of loving you the way you need, and you can still live well and live fully without carrying the weight of that truth. After everything, silence, expectations, blame, and the absence of love, Emma realized what she needed most wasn't forgiveness from others. It was restoration from within, and no one could give her that but herself. She started with the simplest things, reorganizing her living space, hanging new curtains, placing a few green plants by the window. She wanted her home to reflect who she was, becoming a person brave enough to start over, yet marked enough to remember. Emma began therapy, a step not easily taken by someone who had always learned to endure rather than open up. In the first sessions, all she could do was sit in silence and cry. When asked, "What hurt you the most?" she couldn't answer right away. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because there was too much and no one had ever really asked before. Slowly, layer by layer, the memories started to unfold. She realized it wasn't weakness that broke her, it was never having the space to be vulnerable safely. And now, with the weight no longer hidden behind the armor of strength, Emma was finally entering a journey of true healing, slow but deep. Part of Emma's healing journey involved learning to set boundaries clearly, firmly, and without guilt. This wasn't easy. For years, she had been used to accepting, appeasing, and avoiding conflict. She started small, not answering the phone when she wasn't ready to talk, not replying to messages that revolved solely around money or unreasonable requests, and most importantly, not explaining things she didn't need to apologize for. When her mother texted, "Why haven't you called home lately?" Emma responded for the first time with honesty, "Because I'm learning to protect my own peace." There was no anger, just a truth she had never dared speak aloud. Another time when her aunt called asking for financial help for a distant relative, Emma calmly replied, "Right now I'm not in a position to give and I don't want to keep stretching myself thin." She no longer felt guilty saying no. Instead, she felt empowered, protecting her yes to her health, her peace, her time. One moment at a time, Emma began to affirm for herself that boundaries weren't walls to keep people out, they were fences to keep her life safe and whole. As she moved deeper into her healing, Emma began to notice a subtle but profound shift. She no longer viewed her family through a lens of expectation. She no longer waited for apologies. She no longer hoped that those who had hurt her would suddenly change. Instead, Emma learned to accept them for who they were and positioned herself safely to avoid further harm. When her father called no longer accusatory, but clumsily asking, "How's work going?" Emma understood that it wasn't an apology. It was his way of reaching out. She chose not to expect more, but remained polite and measured. Emma also learned to separate her past from her present. She didn't deny the pain she had endured, but she no longer let it define her now. When friends shared stories of loving families, she no longer felt envy. Instead, she quietly gave thanks that she had grown enough not to repeat the cycle. And most importantly, Emma stopped blaming herself. She no longer asked, "Was it my fault they didn't care?" She no longer thought, "If I try harder, maybe they'll change." Now she understood some things are out of her control, but how she lives from this point on is entirely her choice. After a year of living from the inside out, Emma felt like a different person, not because she had become someone else, but because she had finally returned to herself after years of living for others' expectations. She no longer felt the need to repay her family. She helped when she was willing and said no when it exceeded her limits. She spoke when she felt safe and stayed silent when pressured. And she discovered boundaries don't push people away, they make healthy relationships possible. Emma also began opening up to people who deserved her trust. She learned to say, "I'm sad, I need help," to hug others and let herself be hugged. What she once saw as weakness turned out to be the very thing that brought healing. One autumn afternoon while walking through the park, Emma paused on a bench and took a deep breath. No music, no one beside her, and yet she felt a profound peace. A peace born from clarity about her limits, her worth, and the life path she had chosen for herself. And maybe that is the truest kind of healing, when you no longer need others to validate your worth and no longer need anyone to stay in order to feel whole. One early winter evening, Emma received a message from her younger brother. Mom's asking, "When will you come home?" It had been a long time since coming home was phrased as an invitation without a demand attached. Not, "Come help with this," or "Come bring money for that." Just a question, one that sounded almost sincere. Emma hadn't spoken much with her family in months. Not out of anger, but because she needed space to heal. She didn't want to return to a place where she was still seen as the one who must give, must fix, must absorb. She wanted for once to come home because she wanted to not, because she felt guilty. Her brother's message made her pause. Perhaps it was time to reconnect, but this time, not as the old Emma. She had learned how to protect herself. She didn't want to walk back into a relationship where boundaries dissolved. If she returned, it would be on her terms as an adult, not a child seeking approval. She replied, "I'll think about it. But if I do come, I want everyone to respect that we don't talk about my salary or money. I just want to have a normal conversation, not feel like an ATM." A few minutes later, her brother replied, "Got it. I'll let Mom know." Emma read the message and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt she had the right to set terms and not be labeled ungrateful. Emma arrived home on a weekend morning carrying a small bag and a mindset no longer rooted in fear. She was no longer the girl who once rode the bus home with a heavy heart bracing for judgment, blame, or shame. This time, Emma came back as someone who knew exactly who she was and knew she could leave at any moment if the space turned unsafe. The house hadn't changed: the pale yellow walls, the lingering smell of breakfast, the familiar buzz of the TV. Her mother opened the door, hesitated, and softly said, "You're home." No hugs, no smiles, but also no mention of money. To Emma, that alone was progress. The morning passed with light conversation. Her mother asked briefly about work, her father shared a few news stories, and her brother quietly observed the atmosphere. Emma remained calm, not defensive, but not overly open. She knew this was a test. Did they truly want to reconnect, or were they preparing another request? After lunch with just her and her mother in the kitchen, her mother said suddenly, "I know you're upset, but you have to understand what parent doesn't want their child to succeed and help out a little." Emma put her spoon down and looked her mother in the eye. "I was never angry. I was tired. You wanted me to help but never asked if I was okay. You remembered the duty but forgot the emotion." Her voice was calm, not sharp, but for the first time, Emma spoke her full truth without apology. And surprisingly, her mother didn't get defensive. She just sighed. "I never thought of it that way." After that visit, Emma didn't cut ties, but she also didn't let the relationship revert to what it had been. She kept a healthy distance, not cold, but no longer striving to do it all. If her mother messaged, she replied. If invited to a family gathering, she considered it based on how she genuinely felt, not out of obligation. She realized reconnecting doesn't mean erasing the past. The wounds still existed in memory, but they no longer dictated her behavior. Emma chose to hold on to what was good, the times her mother cooked her favorite dishes, the evenings spent watching TV together, the scattered laughter at old family meals. As for the rest, the old expectations, the pressure, the hurtful words, she left them in the past. No longer part of what she carried forward. Someone once asked Emma, "Why stay in touch with people who once hurt you?" She smiled and replied, "Because I've changed. I'm not staying to be loved, I'm staying because I can love without hurting myself." That was the real turning point. Emma no longer did things to be validated. She did them because she chose to, because she was whole enough, aware enough to love with conditions, and that condition was her peace would not be sacrificed. Emma once believed that to maintain a relationship, she had to forgive everything, be soft, be selfless. But now she understood love doesn't mean forgetting. Love means knowing your limits and still choosing to stay if staying doesn't cost your well-being. She no longer sought apologies that never came, no longer hoped her parents would change or understand all she had been through. Instead, she set clear boundaries. I won't engage in any conversation that starts with judgment. I won't respond to messages that make me feel like a burden. I have the right to go silent if I feel disrespected. And strangely enough, once she began honoring those limits, others started adjusting their behavior. The demands stopped. The guilt-tripping calls faded. In their place came simple check-ins, easier conversations, and the sense that finally she was being seen as a full, independent person. Emma never expected her family to heal her, but she believed when you're healed enough, you can keep connections so long as they don't reopen old wounds. One quiet morning as she journaled by her window, Emma wrote, "I reconnect not to hold on, but to declare that I am now strong enough to choose again, this time on my terms." From a young age, Emma was guided to be the smart, obedient, dependable child. She wasn't allowed to fail, wasn't allowed to be tired, and certainly wasn't allowed to say no. Her parents often said, "You're the eldest, you need to set an example. If you do well in school, you'll help the family later. Don't dream too big. Just follow the plan." Emma used to believe that was love. But as she grew older, she began to feel like a suitcase packed full of other people's hopes, with no room for her own dreams. She went to university for economics because her parents said it was practical, even though she loved psychology. She worked an office job because it was stable, even though she longed to write. She stayed in relationships that were approved, not ones that moved her soul. One day, looking back at the path she had followed, Emma realized, "I've spent years becoming who they wanted, but never lived a single day as who I really am." And it exhausted her. Not the work itself, but the effort of pretending to be someone she wasn't for far too long. That afternoon, Emma sat alone in her favorite cafe, her laptop filled with spreadsheets. But her mind was elsewhere on a blank page, and an idea for her first novel, something she had carried inside for years. And for the first time, instead of pushing it aside, Emma opened a new file and titled it, Chapter 1, No Longer Living for Anyone Else. It wasn't just a paragraph. It was a turning point. Because right after that, she decided to quit her job, the job her family praised, her colleagues admired, but made her feel like a character in someone else's story. The decision wasn't celebrated. Her mother cried. Her father called it insane. Some relatives scoffed, all that schooling, and now she wants to be a broke writer. But this time, Emma didn't back down. She didn't argue or beg for understanding. She simply said, "I've lived by everyone else's rules long enough. Now I choose to live by mine whether anyone agrees or not." Emma moved into a smaller apartment, cut her spending, embraced minimalism, and wrote every day. She knew the risks, knew she might fail, but for the first time, everything she did came from her own choice. Life after choosing her own path wasn't easy for Emma. There were mornings when she woke in doubt, asking herself, am I ruining my future or finally living it? There were nights she stared at her bank balance with quiet anxiety. But even in the worry, she didn't want to go back. There were no more compliments from relatives, no more model daughter status, but in return, Emma felt light. Light because she no longer had to prove anything, no longer had to perform. Every morning she woke up, even if her writing wasn't perfect or profitable, those words belonged to her. No one dictated them. Friends asked, "Do you regret it?" Emma shook her head. She knew she was moving slower than others, losing things, facing judgment, but she was living honestly and seeing someone in the mirror she finally recognized. Then one day, a small literary magazine accepted her short story. Not a major award, not a grand milestone, but when she held the printed issue with her name on it, Emma cried. Not because of success, but because for the first time she was seen and celebrated for being herself, not for pretending to be someone else. As time passed, Emma didn't become rich, didn't become famous, and never fully satisfied her parents. But she had learned to embrace her real life with all its flaws and unique beauty. Her relationship with her family still existed, but now it rested on a new foundation. Her parents no longer grilled her about her salary or when she'd buy a house. Instead, they began asking, "Are you happy?" A simple question, but one that took a long journey for them to learn how to ask. Emma knew she couldn't please everyone, but she no longer needed to. Because she had chosen herself, chosen to write, to live, simply to love whom she wanted, to chase small things that made her heart sing. Most of all, she had chosen courage, the courage to live her own story. On a quiet, windless afternoon, Emma sat under a tree in the park near her home, rereading pages from her first novel manuscript. Some parts were strong, others clumsy. Some still needed work. But she smiled. Because these words were hers, not society's, not her family's. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was a life worth living because it wasn't borrowed from anyone else's expectations. After years of living under the weight of others' expectations, Emma didn't just choose her own path, she healed. And she didn't heal by forgetting her pain, but by facing it, accepting it, and walking through it. She no longer avoided conversations about her past, no longer felt ashamed to admit that she'd once been exhausted, lonely, or even wished to disappear from the place once called home. Instead, Emma began telling her story as a natural part of growing up, without sugarcoating, without judgment. She came to understand that healing wasn't about going back to who she was. It was about moving forward with a heart that was wiser, stronger, and clearer about what it truly wanted. In one of her old journals, Emma had once written, "I just want peace." Now rereading it, she smiled and whispered, "Not just peace, but peace with boundaries, with awareness, with self-worth." Writing once her escape had become her guiding light. She no longer wrote to flee, but to connect with herself and with those still stuck in places she once had to claw her way out of. One of the most profound changes in Emma after healing was her ability to listen not just to others, but to herself. In the past, Emma believed that growing up meant being strong all the time, never crying, never complaining, always having answers. But now she understood true maturity is knowing when to pause, when to say, "I need rest." She no longer forced herself to attend every family gathering out of obligation. She didn't stay in conversations that made her uncomfortable. And more importantly, she learned to forgive herself for once being lost, for hoping in the wrong people, for not knowing better. Emma's growth wasn't a shell of toughness, but a core of quiet strength, a steadiness that came from knowing herself, knowing others, and realizing she didn't need to be the best version in anyone's eyes, just the truest version in her own. And from that place, Emma began giving back. She mentored younger women, especially those who messaged her after reading her first short story, "Your story feels like mine." To them, Emma didn't offer cliches. She simply said, "You're not broken. You're just learning to come back to yourself, just like I once did." Emma never tried to become the strong woman who conquered it all. She didn't create a flawless image to earn admiration. Instead, she chose authenticity, even when it meant admitting she had fallen, failed, and gotten it wrong. Because of that, her writing, her talks, her soft skills workshops all felt real, relatable, and deeply moving. She spoke about setting boundaries without guilt. She spoke about the difference between being considerate and self-erasure. She spoke about kindness needing limits and how self-love is the first kind of love. Many young people sought her out not because Emma had the perfect answers, but because they saw in her someone who had walked the path they were walking and still carried a warm voice and a clear gaze. Once after a speaking event, a girl messaged Emma, "I never thought anyone understood the feeling of living without ever really living for yourself. Thank you for saying what I've never had the words to say." Emma read the message and smiled. She didn't need 1,000 fans. One person who felt seen, that was enough. Emma didn't think of herself as successful by society's standards. She didn't have a big house, an impressive title, or a crowd of followers. But each day she did one small, meaningful thing: write, share, listen, uplift. She hosted free talks for final year students. She created a podcast about emotional healing. She worked with small support groups not as a motivational speaker, but as a quiet companion on the journey. One day she had coffee with a young woman struggling with the feeling of living someone else's life. Emma didn't offer solutions. She simply shared her story, then gently said, "You don't need to have all the answers right now. Just start with one small choice, whatever makes your heart feel a little lighter." The girl cried. Emma didn't try to fix it. She just held her hand and stayed the way she once wished someone had stayed for her. Real growth didn't come from Emma standing on a stage. It came in quiet, ordinary moments like this. Because in the end, what she gave back to the world wasn't fame. It was empathy built from the cracks she had once survived. If someone asked Emma was the journey worth it, she wouldn't answer right away. Not because she doubted, but because no path to growth can ever be reduced to worth it or not worth it. There were days she felt light and free, and others when the exhaustion was so deep she wanted to give up. Moments of unmatched strength, followed by hours of fragile uncertainty. And that's when she realized healing isn't a straight climb, it's a spiral looping back each time a little deeper. Emma once believed that leaving her family and their expectations would bring freedom. But it didn't work that way. The old beliefs, the internalized voices, they followed her. They didn't vanish just because she walked away. She had to learn how to talk to her past instead of running from it. And from that reckoning, she began asking herself, if life is a journey back to who we are, what truly matters most? Not achievement, not validation, but the quiet alignment between heart and life. When you dare to live as yourself, even if uncertain, even if alone, you wake each day with a kind of peace no performance can offer. On this journey, Emma came to learn a painful but liberating truth not everyone will understand, and they don't need to. She once tried to explain everything to her parents' friends, even colleagues. Why she left a good job. Why she didn't chase the kind of success everyone else admired. Why she chose simplicity writing and distance. But the more she explained, the more exhausted she became. Because sometimes those we most want to understand us are the ones least willing to listen. And so Emma stopped. Not out of defeat, but because she had learned one of the greatest lessons of adulthood. No one owes you understanding, and you don't owe anyone a life they find comfortable to watch. From that day forward, she quit explaining. She chose to live clearly, firmly, and kindly, but without needing mass approval. She felt lighter. Because in the end, the worth of a life isn't measured by applause, but by whether you genuinely love who you're becoming. No one told Emma that when you start living authentically, you'll lose more than you expect. She lost friendships she once thought unbreakable, not because she changed too much, but because others couldn't accept her growth. Some slipped away silently, others left loudly. A few scoffed. You used to be more fun. You're so distant now. Or, you left a good job for writing. How much does that even make? At first, Emma hurt, deeply, because inside she was still someone who longed to be loved and seen. But then she realized, if I have to lose myself to keep others around, what's the point of their staying? The losses were real, but they weren't wasted. They taught her how to discern who's meant to walk with her to the end. And when you live as your truest self, even if a few leave, you finally reunite with you. And that is worth everything. If she could leave behind just one sentence for others, Emma would write, "You don't have to become someone better, you just need the courage to become yourself." All those years, Emma lived as someone else's version of good. She wasn't failing, but she wasn't happy either. And real happiness, she discovered, doesn't come from meeting expectations. It comes from knowing and accepting yourself, even the imperfect parts. Now that she lives true to her own heart, Emma no longer sees being wrong as failure. She no longer sees being different as something to hide. Every crack, every pause, every person who walked away was part of what brought her home to herself. And if someone out there is still feeling lost, pulled by expectations buried in noise, Emma would simply say, don't be afraid to be the strange one. Don't be ashamed to move slowly. As long as you don't abandon yourself, this life still holds hope. That is the deepest truth Emma ever learned, and the one she's now ready to pass on with all the sincerity of someone who once thought she'd never find the way back.